Okay then, now that the Paris Olympics have kicked off, I thought I'd spotlight the city itself, not on the vast numbers of unsold tickets or the crime-ridden start to the games, the mocking of Christianity with its opening ceremony, even the drama that has occurred in some of the events like boxing, for example, but more on the mental maladies that afflict some who actually visit the City of Light. But before we do that, I want to tell you about a recent incident that is quite related, in that an Italian man, he suffered a heart attack while viewing Botticelli's Venus. Luckily, the man was attended to by 4 doctors who were also within the same gallery, which is located in Florence, Italy, and was rushed to a hospital where he recovered. It's speculated that the man was struck by an affliction known as Stockholm Syndrome, which is also known now as the Florence Syndrome, as it is a physical response to extreme, overpowering beauty. According to the Telegraph, the symptoms include a racing heartbeat, vertigo, fainting, confusion, and even hallucinations. Usually occur when the victim is exposed to a high concentration of classical art or breathtaking natural beauty, and is well documented, especially in the Tuscan city. Moreover, again, according to the Telegraph, the staff at Florence's Santa Maria Nuova hospital, that is the hospital that basically intakes most of its patients from this affliction, they're accustomed to dealing with tourists suffering from dizzying spells and disorientation after admiring the statue of David. We humans are, we're a pretty interesting creature. We have so many mental and emotional tics with ever more illnesses being diagnosed and pathologized yearly, many for financial reasons or obvious mental illnesses and dysphorias being delisted and normalized, not for the health of those afflicted, but for ideological zealotry and political correct reasons. And thus, it's pretty hard now, I would say, to say whether or not actual hard science is any more reputable than much of the politically biased studies and research that is currently being passed off as legitimate social science. Now, with that being said, some of the most interesting mental maladies are those like the Florence Syndrome. These are conditions that are named after places, and probably the most interesting is one that seems to afflict almost entirely Japanese, but now increasingly Chinese people too, and that is the Paris Syndrome. Hi everyone, just to let you know, I have some old favorites as well as new t-shirt designs on sale right now. Link to find them is in the description, and would like to thank you in advance, as it really does help the channel, as for years now, content like this has been put into an algorithmic black hole, as well as being demonetized. So thanks again, as well as I'm pretty sure you'll find something you will like. Most people have heard of the Stockholm Syndrome, which was coined back when bank employees in Stockholm, obviously, were taken hostage in a bank robbery in 1973 and then began to sympathize with their captors. Apparently, the syndrome arises because victims essentially mistake a lack of abuse from their captors for an act of kindness. Given the deteriorating conditions, violent crime, and regular grenade attacks, it might actually even be fair to say that the majority of the populace in Sweden as a whole are now afflicted with this syndrome to a greater or lesser extent.
Ooh, so tolerant.
Another interesting place-specific malady is the Jerusalem Syndrome, which is characterized by extremely obsessive religious-based delusions or other psychoses that are triggered by a person visiting the city of Jerusalem. Examples of this are people thinking they are a person or individual from the Bible or even Jesus Christ himself reincarnated. It's also important to point out that the Jerusalem Syndrome is not endemic to one single religion or denomination, but has affected Jews, Christians, and Muslims of many different backgrounds. But what I would say is that given my experience in Japan and my many times staying in France, Well, by far the most interesting is the Paris Syndrome, which, according to an article on the SBS website, is a psychological condition experienced that, up until recently, almost exclusively by Japanese tourists. Well, it's experienced by these Japanese tourists who are utterly disappointed when the City of Lights does not live up to their romantic expectations. The syndrome, considered an extreme case of culture shock, well, it causes symptoms such as an acute delusional state, hallucinations, anxiety, dizziness, and sweating, and has been documented by medical journals. So why does Paris make Japanese visitors sick? A French psychiatric journal cites the disappointment many visitors feel being caused by a romanticized expectation of Paris as a city of love, fashion, and glamorous people, being hopelessly dashed by the grubby, rude, and increasingly dangerous reality of the city that has become something of an open toilet. The city is a popular tourist destination due to Japan's fascination with all things French. Cities such as Tokyo, well, they're filled with French pastry shops and luxury French fashion outlets such as Chanel and Louis Vuitton, for example. Paris is seen as an idealized version of a utopian culture and center of refined and cultivated society. While Paris indeed is a city that retains much of its beautiful architecture in the central part of the city, it is without a doubt a city in cultural decline. Its famed boulevards are strewn with litter. Walls painted with graffiti, protests, and uprisings by various assortments of groups is now pretty much a common occurrence. Unsafe streets and gangs that prey on tourists. While the fashion capital, the average rank-and-file citizen, is pretty much a fashion clone of your average American Walmart shopper. Add to that the famous smug and rude ways of the Parisians, and you have a perfect storm of unmet expectations crashing into a disheveled reality. And because of this reality, according to the BBC, the Japanese embassy in Paris repatriates up to 20 tourists a year, sending them home with a doctor or nurse to ensure they recover from the shock. The embassy also runs a 24-hour helpline for expatriates experiencing the syndrome. Now, a new addition to this tale of woe, well, it's centered around the emerging middle class in China. And as it continues to grow, the syndrome seems to be getting worse rather than better, as Chinese tourists are now experiencing the Paris Syndrome as well. Now, this does seem an interesting bit of a twist in this story, because according to foreign policy, the stereotypes the Chinese have for the French, well, they're not associated with romance, splendor, cultivation, or things like style. The Chinese actually have some very interesting stereotypes of European nations. For example, they believe Italy to be so weak, Ukrainians to have beautiful women, the Dutch people being tall, or the more insightful ones like the UK being small yet strong, and Hungary being a place where one can obtain a residency permit, or Lithuanians being a suicidal country, and that of Sweden, well, it imports trash. Take these however you want. But for France, the top stereotype for the Chinese is not about fashion, not about romance, but the country has so many blacks in it. Now, here's the thing. Maybe the Paris Syndrome is not actually a mental illness at all. I myself remember Paris in the early 2000s, and I again lived there for a few months in 2022, and it has definitely changed, and not for the better. Maybe the Paris Syndrome is just a realization by sensitive outsiders that a once grand and majestic city is slowly but surely being reduced to a hollowed out shell of its former greatness. And maybe, just maybe, this is why fewer and fewer people are wanting to visit this city that is slowly descending into an open toilet, and why they have so undersold this year's Olympics. What do you think? Leave me your thoughts in the comment section below. And I will try to respond to as many as possible. So then, thanks as always for watching. Please check to see that you're still subscribed, as YouTube has unsubscribed tens of thousands of people from this channel and channels like it without their knowledge or consent. Also, if you'd like to help the channel, ways of doing so are listed in the description. And also you can check out some of that great merchandise and new t-shirts that I have for sale. Again, link is in the description. So again, thanks, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.